today's global context, and this will be sponsored by Reliance Industries Limited. Without further ado, let me welcome our esteemed panelist, Professor Suresh Nanwani, Professor in Practice, Durham University, and Emeritus Professor, Shoolini University, will chair the session. And the other esteemed panelists are Professor Leila, Choukroune, Professor of International Economic Law and Director of the Global Justice and Rights Center of Excellence, University of Portsmouth, UK, and co-chair of the SAIELN, and Mr.Ravindranath Dabare, Attorney at Law of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, and Mr. Arjun Goswami, Director of Public Policy, Cyril, Amarchand, Mangaldas, and Mr. Ashutosh Kashyap, Research Fellow, Center for Trade and Investment Law. Professor Suresh Nanwani, I kindly invite you to proceed with the panel.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this session, which is the panel discussion 3. It's on climate financing and local-led action. I have with me 4 distinguished speakers, and I'm just going to go on a first name basis. You've got their names and titles read out. So I have with me Leila, and then it's Ravi, Arjun, followed by Ashutosh, Ashu for short. And without further ado, each speaker will have 8 minutes. They'll be timed at a 6-minute, a blue color warning, as it were, followed by a 7-minute time to wrap up, and then that's it, for everyone to chip in and ask questions, because I think that's very important for the interactive discussion. So without further ado, let's start first with Leila.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Thank you very much for sharing this panel, and my apologies, I have not really told you so much about what I was going to discuss today. It's a surprise. So I'm going to say a few words about blue finance. Everybody knows about climate finance. We've just concluded the COP29, which was a disaster in terms of finance and for many other reasons. But blue finance is one of the many sort of, new finance related to climate and the environment. So what is the issue? The issue is that less than 1% of official development assistance, ODA, ODA funding is allocated to ocean with development with the SDG 14 being one of the most underfunded SDGs, with only 0.8% of total SDG financing directed to it in 2021, so quite recently. According to the United Nations Environment Programme, by 22, and the figures are a bit old, but the amount spent on conserving nature annually was about 150 billion, and the program argued that this must rise to close to 500 billion a year by 2030. We're not yet there, obviously. You have a number of programs, including, you may have heard, 3030, a worldwide initiative for governments to designate 30% of Earth's land and ocean area as protected areas by 2030. And for that, to meet this target, we need a lot of money, possibly. The problem with this conservation finance or climate finance or sustainable finance is that we have already quite a bit experience on the problem. Conservation finance has moved from green to blue, from climate to indeed green or blue or sustainable. There are many names which are used. You hear names such as green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and so on and so forth. It started in the early 2010, for instance, with the International Finance Corporation, when it raised 1 billion from a green bond in 2013. And then you had many other examples. For instance, in 2016, Nigeria and Fiji issued their first sovereign green bonds for developing countries at that time. The problem is that how green or how blue are they? Well, they're actually not very green or very blue because there are no mandatory criteria for labeling a bond green or blue, even worse. Instead, there are voluntary guidelines. Many of these have been developed in different parts of the world, but the International Capital Markets Association, based in Zurich, Switzerland, what a surprise, provides the gold standard. So again, not many rules and yet a lot of products, if you wish. So much so that we talk about greenium or bluenium, maybe, as far as blue finance are concerned. And you all got the conclusion of what I was going to say. These green or blue bonds or products, because there are many different products, are therefore considered as expensive debt, nothing new under the sun. We have new products, we have green and blue, but we also have a lot of debt. So much so that we talked about the financialization of the economy and its impact on sustainability, which is rather negative. So I'll just say that for the moment, and more than happy to comment and discuss all what I said before. Thank you so much.
Thank you. With your rendition of green and blue, the lights didn't have to work because you made them work. Thank you. Very interesting. I would now move forward to Rabi. He's talking on climate COP29, and let's listen to him here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Do you prefer to stand?
Yeah. Shall I go there?
Yeah, please do.
If anyone can assist me in moving slide, that would save the time. I don't know whether...
Yeah, I think someone at the back would do that. If you can just say next.
Yeah. Shall we directly go to the slide number 8? So that slide number 8 deals with the Article 3 of the UNFCCC. It very clearly, slide number 8 please. It very clearly deals with the Article 3, and it says the parties should take precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent or minimize the causes of climate damage and mitigates its adverse effects. So the mitigation, of course, clearly stressed under Article 3 of the UNFCCC, and even under that, where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing such measures. That actually warrants issuing or assisting climate finances to the parties, those who need to take measures that are enshrined under Article 3 of the UNFCCC. Especially, Article 4 is very important. Next slide, please. The developed country parties and other developed parties included in Annex 2 shall, the next slide, please. Next slide. Other developed parties included in the Annex 2 shall also assist the developing country parties that are particularly vulnerable the adverse effects of climate change in meeting cost and adaptation to those adverse effects. The word used is shall. The parties shall assist the developing country parties. That means there is a liability imposed upon the developed countries and the Annex 2 countries to assist developing countries, especially in the processes of mitigation and adaptation. And climate finance to be compatible with the Paris agreements also, according to the Article 9, and developed countries, country parties shall provide financial resources to assist developing country parties with respect to both mitigation and adaptation. There I am going to point out both under the UNFCCC and especially the Paris Agreement, which was developed after 2015, the liability of financing the developing countries or assisting the developing countries, especially, is clearly enshrined in articles of both UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. Therefore, the assisting especially requires funds. So, the financial assistance and climate finance is actually originating from UNFCCC as well as subsequently signed Paris Agreement. Even Article 11 of the Paris Agreement deals with the capacity building and ability building of developing country parties. That also involves climate financing, and even mitigation investments such as reducing greenhouse gases can be achieved by various type of climate investments, such as shifting away from fossil fuels and improving energy efficiency, changing agricultural practices, sustainable management and conservation of forests, restoring and conserving critical ecosystems, and creating a supportive environment and other measures similar to this. And the adaptation investments, of course, are also important and emanating from these important documents agreed upon by all the nations, and especially national initiatives for facing the threat of climate change. It's a very important area, especially with respect to countries such as Sri Lanka, especially island nations, and identifying the resource and good practices that can help to address climate change, development of climate resilient infrastructure. All these measures actually requires investments, especially climate related investments. And even Article 6 of the Paris Agreement deals with mitigation investments. That is also very important, and the parties should take endeavors, especially the developed countries, should take endeavors to help the developing countries and the poor countries in relation to mitigation investments. And Article 2 deals with the adaptation investments. So, those are also very important. And COP29 also, we know that different type of funds and loss and damage funds, and especially new collective quantified goal to set up US dollars 300 billion annually by 2035 came into discussion. And these discussions were based on fundraising, because there is a dire need of assisting the developing countries in climate issues, especially climate financing is one of the important issues and aspects to be taken care of by the international organizations, and especially the countries responsible for the climate change. And carbon markets is also another mechanism, and especially in Sri Lanka, the climate financing is very important, and but not really looked into, because according to the National Policy of Climate Change, in 2023 alone, Sri Lanka has an annual loss of estimated at US dollars 3,626 million, and that can be attributed to the climate change. But as a country, we have not received at least a considerable share of this damage caused to the country as a result of climate change. And especially the Sri Lanka's agriculture, fisheries, livestock, water, biodiversity, coastal and marine health, human settlements need resilience building actions, which is not properly taking place due to climate financing.
6 minutes.
Thank you. Sri Lanka has already started an national adaptation process, and national adaptation plan effective from 2016 to 2025 has already submitted to the UNFCCC, and it has led for the implementation of national climate change policy and the national climate change adaptation strategy for Sri Lanka. And our indices were also submitted, and resilient programs, some resilient programs are also implemented with the help of with the financial help of the Green Climate Fund and the fund. And especially as an attorney at law, I want to draw your attention to the advisory opinion sought in the International Court of Justice. It's still going on with regard to the climate financing. I think if this effort is successful, the climate financing will take a special turn which will be beneficial to whole world. We hope that there is a fruitful outcome as an advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice, in particular issue which is being taken up before, or which is being argued at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. We have now the third speaker, Arjun, and his topic will be on judicial interventions.
Maybe someone can, oops, is this working?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe someone can turn the slides. That'll be best. You have the slides? You didn't get the slides? Okay. Don't worry. Let me talk it through. Sometimes it's best to do without slides because you can do death by PowerPoint. So let's try and talk it through. So 4 simple parts to this, and I want to take off where Ravi left off. In effect, COP29, I think, has not succeeded at all. There are some things which may have worked at the margins, but let's be honest. Against the demanded commitments of 1.3 trillion annually, we're at 300 billion annually. Secondly, Ravi was quite right about referring to the advisory opinion case at The Hague, but why is it that the Pacific Island countries, Vanuatu and others, joined by another 100 countries, have turned to the International Court of Justice? It's because that large international agreement process through COP is failing. Now, that's not just a matter of financial commitments. In COP28, let me remind you that UAE had managed to persuade the oil-producing countries to move towards transition. In Baku, Azerbaijan went backwards. There was no mention of transition away from oil. So we are at a very serious point, I think, in terms of what's happening on international agreements. 2, there are 2 parts to how this works. One is on disaster, one is on transition. So let's deal with the disaster part first. We all know that there are increasing frequency of natural disasters. We all know there are more extreme weather events. And if you trace back the history, we had the tsunami events of 2004. I remember it well because I was doing development assistance at the time for India. Sri Lanka suffered very badly, so did Indonesia, so did other countries. And there was some movement forward. Early warning systems first started. We started talking about, having some community-based disaster risk management systems. There were further disasters in the region, and so there was another jump forward under the so-called Sendai framework. This basically said, instead of just doing reconstruction afterwards, try and focus on what needs to be done before. Look at prevention. Now, from an Indian perspective, and I come from India, there was some heft put behind that through what is called the 15th Finance Commission, which runs basically for the period until 2026. Dedicated funds, reconstruction bonds, looking specifically at metro cities, urban flooding, looking at identifying landslides, looking at drought risk at the district level. So you're starting to get, local level focus coming through. But here's what has not worked. What has not worked is the method of empowering those local communities through financial resilience. Now, on disasters, you need to make catastrophe pools work so that you make it less expensive. You need to have so-called parametric risk insurance. What does that mean? That means instead of quantifying actual losses, you look at a prediction of when an event is going to take place. And by doing that, there is an automatic payout. You don't have to wait to calculate the loss. Now, we've been experimenting with that in 2 states. In Sikkim, a dam burst called Tista, and the loss was tens of thousands of crores. You know what the payout was? 500 crores. Nothing, peanuts. Why? Because the parametric risk insurance was not properly done. So, there have been similar problems in Nagaland, so I think we've got work to do on that and other local communities initiatives. Last bit, which is what happens when you're dealing with transition, not risk, but transition away from fossil fuels. So I think Ravi referred at one point to carbon markets. This basically means carbon trading, right? What's carbon trading? It basically means that you have a carbon credit, which is a tradable permit for reduction, removal of carbon dioxide, and you have carbon caps set for particular sectors. In other words, if you're polluting, you can buy a carbon credit. Now, at one level, that and offsetting projects are a good thing for local communities. They can use this as a way of having carbon offset projects in order to transition away from fossil fuels. But what's the problem? The problem is that you have deforestation projects which are taking place where there's actually no real gain. It's not been calculated properly. In South America, you have the emergence of so-called carbon cowboys. Now, who are these guys? These are guys who are accused of making tribal communities sign documents that they didn't understand, sometimes resulting in evictions from ancestral lands. So we're talking about, indigenous rights earlier. That's what that's about. In order to really make this work at the local level, you need municipal bonds to work. And there are examples of green bonds in India. We've seen this happen in cities like Indore, in Ahmedabad. But here's the problem. If you look at the total amount of green municipal bonds that we have done in India, I think we have some Americans here somewhere, our total amount is 300 million compared to 4 trillion in the US. It's nothing. And if you're a smaller municipality, you have severe problems in terms of your credit rating, in terms of getting sovereign guarantees, in terms of having those credit ratings come through for you. So what's the answer? I mean, let me close. I think I'm still within my 8, I hope, Suresh. Let me close by saying this, and if not, I'm borrowing a minute from Leila. Let me close by saying this. The global cooperation between states, to be frank, is broken. It's broken on climate finance. What is necessary is locally driven action. And the reason that I'm hopeful about this is not like some pie-in-the-sky dream. Cities are rising in their strength, in their power in countries. We already have a group which is called the C40 group of mayors. They are collaborating together globally to drive action forward where countries can't. They have to tackle some of these underlying issues and the fiscal constraints that are holding back municipalities and cities. But if you ask me, the title of this conference is exactly right. Locally led action. Because if we wait for international agreements, it's like waiting for Godot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arjun. Last but not the least is Ashutosh.
Thank you, Professor Nanwani. A very good afternoon to everyone. I would like to start on and focus on the local-led action, but my focus would largely be on the judicial actions that motivate the local actions in South Asian part and other parts of the globe. So, as you heard about the ICJ advisory opinion and discussion surrounding it, at this point I would like to focus that this also began with a student activist group fueling this this case going up to ICJ, and the reports are supposed to come in early 2025. And I would begin with India, and then I'll cite examples of more South Asian countries and their local level cases which makes the government more responsible and ask the government to do more towards climate action, climate financing and related fields. So India particularly has a long history of litigations. Starting from 1995 to 2024, there are so many cases which revolves around climate finance and revolves around responsibilities of states of doing towards taking more responsible states to ensure more activity in this field and to ensure that more finances flows toward climate actions. And this also begins because our constitution has two articles, one on the right of citizens to cleaner environment, another on duty of the citizen to maintain a cleaner environment. These are Article 48 and Article 51(a)(g) of Indian Constitution. And then in all the cases, I won't name Indian cases, I don't think that becomes relevant in this forum, but in all these cases, the rights that gets recognized and the rights that courts recognizes and ask the state to do the needful flows from what was discussed in panel 1 today, which is right to life. Right to life becomes the major point wherein court comes in and say that this guarantees citizen a right to cleaner environment. This guarantees citizen to right to cleaner air, water and similar things. And this becomes basic amenities which a person needs to survive and thrive. And then the second line of argument flows from human rights, but in the Indian context, it's again tied to Article 21, right to life. And then you see, and then interestingly, there is also equality principle. And at this point, I would like to point out that this is something which is also being discussed at ICG by smaller island developing states. So, and this right to equality is brought in the context. So I will specifically quote one 2006 Supreme Court decision, which takes into account this right to equality and says that considering rising in the global temperature, you have to take into account of people living into different parts of the countries. And there are people who are living in coastal regions of the countries who face a severe burnt and who are at a disadvantageous position in comparison to people living in other parts of the country, maybe in the plain areas or other regions, which will not be affected by, which do not face immediate effect of these rising temperatures, etc. So this brings into the context right to equality. And in context of ICJ, you also see this being argued from colonialism lens and the effect which is still lingering on the populations in these states. And just to give you a number, in Indian Supreme Court as of now, there are more than 100 cases pending, which is the Apex Court of India. And then there is a specialized tribunal, National Green Tribunal, which has more than 3,000 cases pending on climate issues. And all of this brings me back to the point which my fellow panelists were just saying, that we can't rely only on international actions. We have to look inward and we have to look for more actions within the country for the fellow countrymen and etc. And then just to give you one or more examples. So I came across a 2015 Pakistan Supreme Court decision where a Pakistani farmer sued the government for their inactions toward climate change, and it forced the government to bring out a new climate policy and to fund more towards taking climate actions and to right the wrong. And these are also related to right to life, human dignity, right to healthy and clean environment. Then to Nepal, another South Asian country. And here in Prime Minister's office was sued for inaction. And this petition also comes from the local communities. And in this case, Nepalese court observed that Nepalese government had also violated their international commitment. And at this juncture, it becomes important to note that all local level courts, these national courts, also have the power to make the government to comply with the international obligations that it take. For example, nationally determined obligations. Where do you go and where do you ask someone to implement that? The best forum is the local courts. And if they becomes active, I'm sure that more actions will follow and things will speed up. And then another example.
You have 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Professor. And then another example from Bangladesh. Herein also a petition was filed regarding violation of fundamental rights to life due to lack of environmental protection. And court held that Constitution gives the citizen rights and the state duty to promote public health, which is included within the right to life. And we see in all these decisions that everything flows back to the right to life and everything flows back to the right of a citizen to live in a clean environment. And all of these discussions started from local communities, which led court to observe and ask state to do more towards these things. And I think that's it. And to conclude, I will borrow from something which was submitted by Marshallese people at ICJ. So they say that we are in this canoe together. So it's important that all of us take this action together, and there is a need to look inward, as well as I think that looking will also enable more discussion at the multilateral forum, happening more at domestic level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very distinguished panelists coming with different interpretations and facets. I just want to give a snapshot or recap to see where the dimensions have been running through. So we had Leila at the beginning, and she started with colors, right? Blue, green, greenium, etc. She covered a spectrum of countries, and I think I love that because we've come across Fiji, we've heard other countries being mentioned as well by other speakers, the Pacific, India, Sri Lanka, Japan, EU, and the Sendai, and then we have developing countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh coming in now. So we see the spectrum. It's all the countries, yeah, that are being affected here. And then in terms of the players, it's just not the states and the countries, but also the other players. And the other players are think tanks, research institutes, local actions, local-driven actions, and that's the theme for this session. And there we have local communities, indigenous peoples, etc. I want to extend that, and I think it's wonderful because we even have ethical considerations, if you want to say, because I think it belongs to everyone. And now when it belongs to everyone, you know, even the Pope has come up with ethical considerations, yeah, a couple of years ago. So you see the dimensions that this has taken. It's everyone's business. Ask Greta, she'll tell you that. It's everyone's business. So what I really found interesting here was one theme that I really want to explore here, and then I will make it open to the audience. The theme of resilience. I heard that, and that came through, right through, in the sense that Ravi spoke about resilience, and it was like by countries, and he mentioned Sri Lanka's efforts in the sectors that the country sectors, resilience in the program or project that he mentioned, and then hope. There was a hope for, you know, fruitful action coming from ICJ. So, you know, that's like, okay, states, groups can put in petitions or whatever for voices to be heard, and that's like, we want to be heard. And looking at a crystal ball, is this like a disaster or transition? I think that was really interesting that was being brought up. And I invite views on that as well. And then we had a real smashing statement that COP29 did not succeed at all. That's really telling. Now, you know, the jury is out. We've heard one view, and that's very telling. So I like to think what you think, because different perspectives are important in understanding how resilience can build up here. And if you look at that, we even heard financial resilience, right? And where does that financial resilience come from? From the states, countries, where else? What else? Because humanity is at stake, and that's the reason why resilience is so important. And that's what I want to try out here by turning first to Leila. What do you think in terms of resilience here, followed by the other speakers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Suresh. Well, again, I'm going to build upon what you just say. Why do we think, and many of us around the world just think the same, it was very easy to predict COP29 a pure failure, ridiculous, waste of time. Why is that? Because in fact, you may have many new actors, but the principles are just the same. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in the sense that we're building up debt. We're building up, for some countries, a lot of debt, and this doesn't work. And actually, we might not even need this money to change. So I'm going to give you one example you might have heard about already. The Nature Conservancy. It is the world's largest conservation organization measured in financial assets and revenue. In 21, revenues for conservation programs were at just over 1.8 billion, more than the government revenues of Belize and Ecuador combined. The value of its asset was 9.3 billion. Much of the growth of this Nature Conservancy organization has been achieved through its work on financial investing and using innovative financial instruments. How did they do that? When I mention innovative financial instruments, we're talking about what I alluded to before: green, blue bonds, social sustainability bonds, and so on and so forth. In fact, after the financial crash of 2008, TNC appointed an investment banker from Goldman Sachs as a CEO who applied the exact same principle as he was applying in Goldman Sachs. And it worked in the sense that the organization got richer. Is it working in favor of conservancy, in favor of the environment, and so on and so forth? Not necessarily. But to give you an example of what they do, TNC bought about 21 million of debt owned by the Seychelles to bilateral lenders, including the UK, Italy, and France or South Africa, as part of a deal with the Seychelles government to sort of alleviate the debt. But in fact, it's a sort of complex financial construction, which in the long run doesn't work, because these countries are getting more and more debt. So the real question is the following: for climate, for blue, green economies, environments, do we really need a lot of cash? That's the discourse generally. You need a lot of cash, you won't be able to change whatever you have to change in your economy because you're too poor, you're too illiterate, you don't know what you're doing, and we're so generous, we're going to lend you a lot of money and everything is going to be great. The thing is that, in fact, conservation projects from this perspective must provide, or climate projects, they must provide a financial return to make them attractive to private investors. And that's the problem, because we financialize, everything becomes monetary, everything is discussed, conceptualized in monetary terms. So in fact, a lack of finance might not be a problem. The problem is to see this question through finance only.
Thank you. And Ravi, what's your take on resilience that you've mentioned in your presentation?
Thank you, Professor Nanwani, for giving me this opportunity. I emphasize, especially I want to emphasize, especially the countries like Sri Lanka, poor countries, developing countries, and island nations are severely affected with the vulnerable climate change events. And really, imminent and urgent actions should be taken for the adaptation measures. The mitigation measures, of course, can be taken at certain steps, but immediate requirement, not only for Sri Lanka. If you look at the world, there are a lot of island nations and vulnerable nations to the climate change effects, which needs immediate adaptation measures to be taken. But they, especially these countries, are striving even to meet their day-to-day expenses. So how, if the international community and international, especially the countries, those who are responsible for the issues, the climate issues faced by the world, should take immediate measures, at least through the intervention of international bodies such as International Court of Justice and various other international bodies which can make some pressure on these parties. I think should take immediate, the countries, the world scenario will be very pathetic, and especially the countries like us will have to go through severe repercussions. Now, as I mentioned, the country's burden or the country's expenditure on climate change effects for the previous year runs into $3.6 billion. So who is going to bear this, even this poor nation, whether this poor nation should be allowed to bear this? Those are the problems that we have to, international community has.
Thank you. Do you think the ICJ advisory opinion would be like a plastic ban that will test the resilience?
That I can't predict.
No, I'm not asking you to predict, but looking at the crystal ball, because that's what we've been looking at since 1993.
We hope actually there should be an binding, international binding decision.
It's just advisory, it's not binding.
Yeah.
How do you, what's your take on that?
Yeah, at least if now say
would it ease the resilience, the tension?
Hope so, because even now, for instance, even raising 100 billion fund was not achieved at the exact time they targeted. Even the last COP was trying to complete 100 billion. It was only 759 million they could raise. Not even they couldn't reach even 100 billion targets. And even 300 million targets by 2023. If we remain silent, will never be achieved.
No, that's good. You see, numbers are abounding, right? Trillions and all that. And then we have Leila saying, well, the Seychelles, like, you know, it's all going, what's it all for? So you see the other end of the spectrum. But I want to just put it out in the open, the diversity of views. Arjun, please.
So I think, Suresh, I believe that despite my rather dark tone about failures of COP29, I think there is real hope for resilience. And, you know, the advisory opinion, let's start with the advisory opinion. Yes, it is only advisory, but look at the nervousness of states. My own state, right, is saying, oh, please don't give us any obligations over and above Paris. So they know pressure is coming. When you get an advisory opinion with over 100 countries joining in it, that's not something you can just wave away, right? So I think that's going to have some impact. Now, add to that what we're seeing at the state level. Now, I'm, you know, not telling you any secrets. The incoming president in the United States is not a great believer in climate change.
Yeah.
But California as a state adopted its own earthquake authority. There is a lot of state level action happening in countries like the United States. And if we think of countries like our own, just in the disaster sense, we're getting cities starting to come with heat action plans and so on. That's municipal level action. That's state level action where the rubber really hits the road. And when we think about, you know, those transition risks we're talking about, I mean, I just want to quote one number. Yeah, I told you it's only 300 million relative to 4 trillion. So let me give you a slightly more hopeful number. When Ahmedabad put out its green bond, it set it out for 200 crores. It was oversubscribed 6 times. That means investors are really flooding in. They believe this is worthwhile. they believe this is good to do. Now, there are going to be some controversial parts of it. It'll likely mean that there'll be a much bigger push for small nuclear modular reactors. But that is necessary to bring private sector investment in, etc. This cannot all be done through public funds. But in sum, if you look at private sector response, investor response, local action, state level action, this is rolling. And if we get that advisory opinion in the right direction, it's going to give this a boost. So I'm an optimist in that sense on resilience.
Okay, so we have the North Star. Hopefully it is really going to give some light. And Ashutosh?
Yeah, I completely agree with what was said just now. And just to bring a different context, you see, the resilience is the thing which leads all these local actions, which ask states to look inward rather than only looking outward for the finances.
Correct.
And it forces them to innovate.
Correct.
Innovate for financing, what Professor Leila mentioned and what Mr. Arjun just mentioned. So these innovations are also forced by resilient society, which asks them to do more. But at the same time, we can't overlook capacity of certain states. So I was going through the transcript of the submissions made before ICJ. One of the transcript, very interestingly, paints a very scary picture. It says if water level rises 50 centimeters in the neighborhood, there are thousands of people who will lose life. And they also attach a number which they can't provide immediately in terms of support. So in those cases, rethinking at multilateral level becomes very important, because there are some states who, because of their size, despite innovation, can't do enough. And we need to think about them also. So I don't think there is one solution, but as Mr. Arjun said, that an action needs to happen at multilateral, local, possibly all possible levels. And if not enough, then we need to think about more avenues.
Thank you. So we see the resilience coming at various levels, and I think, Ashutosh, you made something very clear, that there is innovation, and that is important to move forward, yeah? Okay, the floor is open. Questions from the floor, you can add to what has been said, or you wish to ask something, please go ahead. Raise your hand and the mic will be sent to you. Thank you. If you could just give your name, please, before you speak. Thank you.
I am Cyril. I'm doing my LLM in International Law from South Asian University. So my question is, the panel talked about advisory opinion and also climate debt financing.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? If your question is specific to a particular person, please say who you would like to speak. Otherwise, it's assumed it's going to be general.
No, it's a general question.
Thank you.
The question is, in the trifecta of advisory opinions on climate change at the international level, that is at the ICJ, ITLOS, and then at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So the advisory opinion was given by ITLOS recently. So this opinion interpreted a term called other assistance, and other assistance, they interpreted it it may include financial assistance. It did not say it shall include. So, and while interpreting the financial assistance later on, it said that it was silent on whether it includes debt financing. It was silent on the mode of financing. So, given this context, is it hopeful that the ICJ might comment on the preferred mode of climate financing? Should it be grants, or should it be climate debt financing? Because there's a principle of common but differentiated responsibilities involved here.
Okay, I think I'll just take that question, but maybe I'll put it to Ravi and then to Arjun. I think Ravi mentioned about a crystal ball that, it's very difficult to look at it, but Ravi, you want to say something, and then followed by Arjun?
Yeah, let Arjun come.
So I think the chances of, in my view, of an advisory opinion of the ICJ being specific about types of financing, I think that's unlikely. I don't think that's the direction it's going to go, because it's an advisory opinion. Suresh was absolutely right. It's an advisory opinion. So it's going to set the broad direction. This is why Ashutosh and I keep coming back to the notion of whatever is done at that level, it's local action that's going to have to translate it. And that's why we keep talking about all these innovations, whether it's, you know, Leila's multicolored scheme, or whether it's me talking about parametric, you know, risk insurance measures, municipal bonds, etc. And that's where the action will then come. But there'll be a moral boost. That's my view.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Ali? Yep.
Thank you very much for all. It was very interesting. I would like to share with you a provision from investment protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement concerning the special economic zone with the low carbon zone. Do you have you the same zone, special economic zone in South Asia? This is my first question. And in the same protocol, you have another provision, Article 6 or 7, concerning the incentive measures to encourage or to promote the green investment. It will be another way to finance or to reshape the local approach of investment law.
Is your question general or is it specific to someone?
General.
Okay. Arjun?
Sure. You want to go first? No? Okay. So let me, Leila? I don't know why I'm bravely stepping forward first, but okay. Let me just suggest the following to you. Yes, we have special economic zones, certainly in India. We've had them for a long time, but they have been economic. Now, there is another type of special economic zone for financial services, which has been started some time back. There's some talk about doing it for technology. Is it conceivable that eventually we would have it for low carbon? Maybe. But I think let's look at what's already there. You know, there's been a high seas treaty, right, recently on biodiversity. And what's telling is they're starting to talk, they're not starting to talk, they're specifying that you must have marine protected areas. Every state that signed on to it will have to have marine protected areas. Now, if that's going to happen in the high seas, you're going to have it elsewhere also. So I think that's where I draw comfort.
Okay, would we have another question, please? Yep, go ahead, please. I don't know your name. Yes, I do, yeah.
So it's interesting. I'm Arnav, by the way. I'm an assistant professor at National Law School, Bangalore. So it's interesting to hear.
That's a very good law school. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're going to have a very good question. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I hope that's the same about the question. But so we're hearing about why we need a very comprehensive, locally, nationally, multilaterally driven approaches to green financing, while at the same time we're also seeing a lot of strategic implications flowing into the domain of green finance, particularly in domains such as clean energy transitions, because what we are seeing in a lot of spaces is a club culture which is sorting and picking up investments in certain areas which are opposed to maybe certain other options which are strategically opposed to where the investment is going. How does that interact with the entire notion of green financing? While we mention ICJ advisory opinion and local efforts, does that also interact with this space? And that is highly state-centric. I mean, it's very difficult to dislocate that entire domain.
So maybe let me start.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So listen, I mean, transition from the point of view of a developing country is very different from the perspective you take of it in a developed country. So in a developed country, you will say, well, I just want you to stop fossil fuel and go renewable, right? Simple proposition. Because that's what, Paris overall as an objective requires you to do that. If you're in a developing country, you look at the employment impacts. I mean, if you're looking at a country like India, in certain states like Orissa, Jharkhand, etc., where you've got major fossil fuel plants, you can't just wave it off. You can't say, forget it. You have to retrofit. You have to ask yourself, how do we make that move to biogas? How do we make it move to other things that we can do? And you have energy needs, which haven't peaked yet. So you're going to have to, and you know that renewable, despite all you're pumping in to solar and wind, is not going to do it. So you're going to have to go nuclear. That's necessary. Now, there are multilateral institutions who say, never, never, never will I finance. I mean, that's not, to my mind, a sensible position. There's a specialized body, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that is promoting that. So I think, there will have to be a differentiated view. And though you say it is state-centric, you're right, but remember, local communities are affected. Why is the state going to react to that? Because they are going to be concerned about the impact for local communities. So you're back again to having to look at local communities, not just at state level. I think this liberal internationalist theory of the last 70 years, that the only unit that mattered was the state, it's over.
I think taking on from there, the state approach was the approach because citizens didn't have a say or were not part of the participatory process. But now you would, in the sense that no project would just take off if people say, we don't want it, or why are we having it? Right. We want to know why it's happening. Years ago, if you think of Narmada project or whatever projects you had, the disaster projects,
correct,
you could just pass it off. But now,
you can't.
I think no one would even dare do it because they know the stakes are high. They need to consult. There's a new regime of players. There's a change regime here that you need to take into account concerns from people. Ethical concerns I really want to raise because it really comes up to the fore. COP28, whoever was leading it, and why are you leading it? Should you be involved in it? The dynamics have changed. It's now everyone can have a say. If you go to COP, it's just not the states who are there, it's everyone who's there. You could yourself go there and just go and see what's going on and make a point.
And you have to be careful about saying that the state as a unit can necessarily always, represent its interests well. I mean, there are very bad examples, I must tell you, on deep sea mining, where individual Pacific states, in their negotiating position on those upcoming legal agreements, are being represented by deep sea mining companies. So you have to be very careful. That's why you need this balance, which Suresh is talking about.
Question from Pushkar.
Pushkar? Okay, is there any other question? Otherwise, we'll call it to a close. 1, 2, 3. I wish to thank you all, and could you please give a round of applause to the panelists? Thank you.
Thank you very much for our esteemed panelists for your insightful contributions. And let us take a moment to express our deep gratitude to our esteemed panelists. These tokens represent our heartfelt felt thanks for your time, effort, and dedication in making this event success. I cordially invite Professor Suresh Nanwani to distribute the token of appreciation.